Hello and welcome to County Board Wrap-Up, where each month we take an in-depth look at the key actions by the County Board, as well as important county news that affects you and our community. I'm your host, Kara O'Donnell, and joining me today, as always, is County Board Chair Matt DeFerranti, as well as Board Member Christian Dorsey. And we have a special guest star this month on County Board Wrap-Up in his first appearance with us, County Manager Mark Schwartz. Mark, thank you for joining us today. Matt, Christian, you as well. Now, everyone's here today to talk about two big issues: the county's ongoing response to the pandemic, including the vaccine program, as well as the proposed fiscal year 2022 budget. Now, we'll start with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's officially been deemed the longest local emergency in Arlington's history. And as we approach the 1-year mark of that emergency, it remains county government's top priorities. So, Mark, I'm going to start with you. We're going to put you in the hot seat right away here on your first appearance on County Board Wrap-Up. So if you could give us a brief summary of where things stand with Arlingtonians getting vaccinated.
Thank you very much, Kara. I'm glad to be here. So we covered a lot of this information last week, but I'll give you up to the moment statistics. We have received over 15,000 doses of vaccine and administered about 14,000 first doses. And we have over close to 5,000 second doses. We have two sites, one down at Sequoia, the other at Walter Reed Community Center. We're working our way through the list of priorities laid out by the state. We're currently vaccinating those who are 65 plus. We're about 65 to 70% through there. I have had the opportunity to visit our site down at Sequoia, and we are doing a very, I think, an excellent job once people are showing up, getting them through the system, either getting the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine and getting all sorts of information out to people. The one thing that we're spending a lot of time on right now is trying to get people pre-registered. And I know that board members have been very focused on this. We started this week having teams of people go out to Arlington Food Assistance Center and some of our committed affordable housing projects to have people sign up and get in the system. You can't get vaccinated unless you pre-register. And that's been the main focus of what we've been doing. And we really want people to get involved in that. And sort of the last point is that we do not have nearly enough vaccine. We're still getting shy of about 3,000 vaccine doses a week. And with that, the pace is still going much slower than we would like.
Now, Mark, you mentioned the pre-registration, and of course, a question on a lot of Arlingtonians' minds was this migration to a statewide pre-registration system. Let's talk a little bit about the timeline associated with that.
Right. So back, I think it was on the 12th of February, the state asked us to shut down our pre-registration system, and they were going to stand up a statewide system on the 15th, which was a Tuesday. So we shut our system down. The state stood up its system on the 15th. The state system hasn't worked very well for the moment. They're working on improving it. But I wanted to assure everyone who signed up with Arlington, the over 40,000 people who pre-registered, they are in line, all their names are intact, and we're working our way through that list. We still have a fair amount to go. People who've signed up with the state system have been frustrated because as they sign up and they go back in to check to see if they can see their name, that isn't actually functioning very well at the moment. We've been told by the state that by the end of the week we're in right now, which is the 26th, 27th, that should be better. But it's caused a lot of frustration on the part of a lot of Arlingtonians who wanted to go in and make sure, because our data was supposed to be in the state system, to check. You know, people want to know that they're in there. They type in their name and it doesn't come back, and it adds to their sense of frustration and panic. And so a lot of people have been going in and registering on the state system. So, and as much as we say that's not necessary, if people can't see their name, they're going to keep doing that. So the state's working on it. We're very frustrated with it. And I just wanted to assure everybody, if you've signed up, pre-registered, you're in the queue. When the shots become available, you will get notified.
Now, I know a lot of folks are hearing things in the news media, what have you, about vaccines being available at local pharmacies, at CVS, at Safeway, perhaps some others. What can you tell us about that pharmacy program, and how, if at all, does it affect the county's efforts?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. The federal government has been providing a relatively small number of doses directly to pharmacies. So in Arlington, there are 3 Safeways. There's also a CVS along Columbia Pike and a Giant on South Glebe Road that have been getting some, when I say small amounts, I think 70 doses have been going to each of the Safeways. That system, where they're being distributed directly to them, is directly from the federal government to those pharmacies. We had really hoped that those doses could have come to us and that we could then provide them to the pharmacy so that we could integrate our sign-up system. So that is not the case right now. The pharmacies have said they're going to limit the people who get to take those vaccines to those who are 65 and older, but they have not said they would limit it to Arlingtonians. So there's a little bit of a strange dance going on now where people in Virginia are trying to find whatever CVS, whatever Giant, whatever Safeway they can to go in and get a shot. And it's led to some additional, I would say, in a good day, complexity, on a bad day, chaos. So we have not integrated that with our system, even though we would like to. And it's just another added layer of complexity and confusion.
Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it does help get more Arlingtonians vaccinated. And so every little bit helps. Folks just need to understand they're 2 completely separate systems. Let's talk a little bit, and Matt, Christian, you may want to chime in here as well, about equity in the vaccine rollout, as well as vaccine hesitancy. Can you take a look at all about the efforts to ensure health equity in this rollout? And is vaccine hesitancy a problem at all here in Arlington?
Sure. Thank you, Kara. I'll just start with pointing out that, in addition, Mark mentioned the efforts with the Complete Vaccine Committee, the outreach efforts that we're doing, going to AFAC and affordable housing units. We're also partnering with the Free Clinic. And this week, we've been working on finalizing an agreement to do some vaccines there. It's going to take a few more days, but we have been in discussions, and Mark and Ruben have been leading us in that regard. So I think that's very important, because we know historically our Black and Brown residents have been underserved in terms of health care. And we really have to make sure that our vaccine doses are going to those most in need and most at risk, which unfortunately still is the case more often than we'd like, our communities and individuals of color. So we're working, the Free Clinic is located on Columbia Pike, and there's an opportunity, because they have relationships with individuals that are uninsured and underinsured, and we can help address equity in that way. So those are 2 components. And you mentioned also vaccine hesitancy, and I think that's something that the whole board has not been stunned at, but has seen that Arlingtonians have really stepped up. And Christian, I know you've talked about that in part, as well as the equity issue too.
Indeed. And, even though it's difficult to see, equity is really at the forefront of how we've rolled out the vaccination program and how it was structured by basing it on age and priority group. It was designed to address those most at risk. And we understand that many people who are at significant risk for COVID complications and severe illness and death happen to be people who are racial and ethnic minorities. And if they are in those priority groups for age and occupation, they have had access to this vaccine from the very beginning. But within that, we know that there's that second layer that you talked about, Kara. Are there people who are vaccine hesitant, or maybe even more to the point, not necessarily aware of what they need to do in terms of getting on that pre-registration list and how they raise their hand to get in line so that when their number is called, they will get the access. And that's where we've enlisted the help of our community. The wonderful decision to repurpose our Complete count committee that worked towards community engagement in the census to a complete vaccination effort is just a masterstroke. And getting those individuals to recruit partner organizations who will then go to communities who we want to prioritize and make sure get vaccinated, making sure they not only know what the processes are that need to be followed, but that they can address any questions about vaccine hesitancy for people who may rightly have a distrust of these national vaccination programs. Fortunately, it seems that a lot of polling data that I've seen has shown that vaccine hesitancy among our targeted groups is probably less of an issue than just making sure they know how to do it, making sure they get into the system. So we're very much oriented on doing that.
Okay. And of course, vaccine is what is on everyone's top of mind at the moment, but there are still quite a few pandemic-related issues not related to vaccines that are surrounding the county. What are some of the other efforts that are being discussed and worked on right now?
Well, I'll start. All of us have been thinking a lot about eviction prevention, making sure that people can stay in their homes. And we talked in the board meetings about over 2,600 individual households have been helped with some rent relief and cost relief so that they can stay in their homes. And then there's also hunger, which we know has increased. Food insecurity has increased, and we as a board have stepped up with resources, but we're also in the process of finalizing a committee that led by Mark as manager, but with all of our support and input that is going to seek to address the increase in hunger and also create some thoughts and a strategic plan to address the sustainability of our hunger system. We've had a lot of PTA presidents step up, and we need to get their best thinking and really work on that challenge. So those are two, and I'm sure that there's others. We continue, as you said, COVID and vaccine are our first, second, third priorities at this moment. So I don't know, Mark or Christian, if you had pieces to add. We're doing a lot as we try to respond to the year anniversary of the pandemic.
And I'll just maybe tee up Mark for the next segment by saying, the unfortunate reality of this pandemic is while it has certainly affected some people most acutely, those who have gotten sick, those who have died, those who are facing the severe, life sustainability issues that Matt mentioned, but it affects everyone, every single resident and stakeholder in our community. And one of the ways in which that's very well reflected is in how it's impacted county government and our budget. Revenues have been significantly curtailed. In addition to meeting extraordinary needs, it means that there's had to be an on-the-fly rethinking of how we do just about everything in Arlington County government with not only new revenue levels in the immediate, but also an outlook that is at best uncertain. So, this is something where COVID all of the time, but the reverberations and echoes, you can't escape them. They're everywhere.
That actually makes for a great segue. So thank you for that, Christian. But so, Mark, you did present your proposed fiscal year 2022 budget, one that is very much affected by the events of the last year with the pandemic. Can you give me kind of the highlights reel?
Yes. So in the proposed budget, which the county board is going to start reviewing it in detail starting this coming week with about 10 work sessions. I propose something I'm calling a bridging budget. So it's to bridge from where we are right now, where we're in the middle of the pandemic, to a point hopefully where we're past the pandemic. So given that, in order to balance the gap between revenues and expenses, and as Christian just said, our revenues have been affected severely. Most significantly, if you take a look at our hotel occupancy rates and taxes, those are down $16 million. Our meals taxes, tax receipts are down. In order to bridge that gap, we've had to do a couple of things. One is I'm proposing about $16 million in cuts, reductions in capacity in the system eliminating positions, none of which are filled, which is something I'm glad to be able to say. We were able to do some early out programs and some hiring freezes. The other piece of it is something which isn't very traditional, at least in all the budgets I've worked on, where we're proposing to use some funds that are coming from some lease renegotiations and some one-time funds to bridge us to what hopefully will be a better fiscal year in calendar, when we get to calendar 22. Given all that, the cuts, people will notice some of the reductions in services and some of the changes, but we're also able to, we took some extra cuts so that we were able to turn back some of that money into some investments, which I think are still important around equity and around some of the work that our police practices group has done, recommended some enhancements in some of our processes with police and mental health, police and traffic, also some focus on some other areas that we'll get a chance to talk about. So overall, not an incredibly draconian budget in that respect, but individual taxpayers, on the residential side, residential values have gone up. I proposed a flat tax rate. The board advertised a flat tax rate that still will see individuals paying more on average. And I'm glad that we were able to propose the flat tax rate. The only other thing I would note is in a separate area of the budget, we haven't proposed increasing the rate associated with stormwater. And that's something that we've worked on really hard over the last year and a half since the floods of July 2019. And happy to say that I think we have a good down payment on the first step of trying to address what's about 60 or 70 years of benign or even malignant neglect when it comes to stormwater. And, some very exciting efforts there. So I will stop with that.
Now, Mark, you mentioned that, last year, as we saw, you had to kind of come back and revise the fiscal year 2021 budget numerous times as some of our early predictions for the pandemic had to be revised a bit. Do you expect some of the same this year since there's still so much uncertainty out there?
Well, one thing, and I neglected to mention this earlier on, and I think Matt said our top three issues are COVID, COVID, COVID. The primary thing, if you look at our budget message, is that we've set aside a $17.5 million bucket of contingency funding to try to act as a shock absorber, to try to not have to upset the rest of the budget every single time we need to make a decision to allocate funds towards all the things that Matt and Christian have talked about, whether it's eviction prevention, food assistance, working with our small businesses. So I'm hoping we don't need to do a lot of readjusting except looking at that fund. The one place where I wasn't able to do what I had hoped to do was for our employees. So we may come back, depending on what happens with the American Recovery Plan, that's what it's called, going through the House and Senate right now. If additional funds come to us, there may be a way to address some of the shortfalls in employee compensation. And there were also a few service reductions built into a few of our library branches. Maybe we'd be able to address that. So, I wrote the only thing that's constant in this budget, it's going to sound trite, is going to be change, but we try to construct it so that we don't have to redo the entire budget like we had to do last year.
Right. Well, Matt, Christian, the manager has proposed his budget. Now what?
Well, Mark mentioned the 10 work sessions that make February a busy time in any year. We are going to have work sessions Tuesday, Thursday next week, and they'll proceed about that same regularity. And so that's the opportunity for us to hear from individual departments and agencies and really look in detail at what Mark has proposed. And we all did agree on a no tax rate increase, which I think is the right step, particularly in this moment as we're trying to just focus at the start of this year on vaccine distribution and while still doing the things we need to do as a government to keep operating. So that's kind of how we'll take a look at it. There'll be 2-hour sessions where we bring in the department heads. We look at the some of the pages of and some of the details of the budget, and ask questions. And there will be some changes and shifts. I will say that the 16.5, 17 million that Mark mentioned in contingency for COVID really makes sense to me. And also, I think you alluded to it, Mark, but the federal help here is critical. If we want to provide help to small businesses, which our grant program earlier last year did really well, we need some of those resources, and we also need them to help address some of the COVID costs for health, in addition to hunger and housing. So we'll get into the details. I do think that this proposal is a very good starting point, and the process plays out from here through until into April, when we'll have our final budget hearing and adopt a budget at that point. So we got some work to do, but we started with, at least from my view, a good place to begin our conversation.
And as always, our community will have their say, as many have exercised already through letters and comments to the county board. We will have opportunities that culminate with those public hearings that Matt mentioned in April on both the budget proposal itself and the tax rate proposal. So our public has ample opportunity, and we welcome comments through any channel that anyone prefers. So email are very common. And we have also regular opportunities to engage with people on an unscheduled or on a lightly scheduled basis through our Open Door Monday program, and then those public hearings coming up in early spring.
Okay, well, we will continue this conversation over the next few months as well. With that, we're going to take our first break. Mark, thank you very much for being our special guest star today on County Board Wrap-Up and discuss some of the challenges the county's facing, both with vaccines and the budget. We will take that short break, and when we come back, I'll talk with the chair and board member Dorsey about some big changes coming to the county's longstanding residential parking permit program. Stay with us. Welcome back to County Board Wrap-Up and our discussion today with County Board Chair Matt DeFerranti and Board Member Christian Dorsey about some of the key decisions the board made at its February meeting. Now, there were some major changes to the residential permit parking program. The board's action, taken in February, culminated a 3-year review process, and it was the first major review of the program in more than a decade. And it was certainly not without quite a bit of controversy and some public comment on the process. So we will dive right in with that. Matt, why don't you start and kind of give us an overview?
Sure. We received so much in the way of citizen input on this issue. The packet was almost 200 pages of just comments, in addition to the staff report and the comments that we heard from residents virtually on Saturday. So it's an important issue that really impacts a lot of people's lives on just a tactical, operational, day-to-day level. And so what we've done is just shift how we're thinking about parking so that it's a little bit more efficient and a little bit more equitable. Efficient in terms of how you get the RPP eligibility. We had 2 complicated percentage-based tests, and we just simplified it so that it's you need a significant majority, but you can get that permit. And then we also recognize that of the households in the county, about 10% actually live in these zones. So many people don't, and we wanted to make the program equitable so that those of us who don't live in these permit zones aren't subsidizing the program entirely for the 10% who do. So that's going to mean an increase in fees so that the program can be budget neutral. And that's also, we think, going to be fair as we seek to use all of our resources equitably across the whole county. So that's some of it. We also took a major step in listening to comment and did not end up adopting the 2-hour paid parking in these residential permit zones. That's what we heard from so many residents about, and the board had consensus that at this stage, it just wasn't the right step, because if you think about some of the areas, Clarendon and Crystal City, we don't want them to become places where commuters come in, park there, and go into work via metro. So that's kind of a high level. There's a lot of detail in this policy, but that's a high level of steps we took in this.
Well, to that end, and I know there were several different options that the board was presented with for in terms of what some of these revamped programs might look like. But let's focus on the option that you ultimately decided on, and what are kind of the different steps within that or features within that.
Sure, I'll talk a little bit more. And Christian, I know you had thoughtful comments as we tried to balance this. We talked a little bit about, I mentioned the 2-hour piece of things that we eventually opted not to include, but we also talked about the number of passes that is available to homeowners, and expanding the program so that small apartment buildings and townhomes also can get residential permits. So those two steps, allowing our multifamily neighbors that aren't in site plans, so usually it's townhomes, small condos, and small garden-style apartments, they now will have the chance, if they're located in these residential zones, to also participate. The other step I mentioned is the number of passes, and we debated this, but we decided that if you have a driveway, you should use it to park a car. And so the number of passes for those without driveways, we left at 4. And if you have a driveway, we put that at 2 additional passes that you would get. So you could park car or cars in your driveway, and then 2 on the streets in your zone. So those are 2 components, big components that we worked on. And I know that there's a number that were important to you, Christian. I also think that we shared the view on allowing the multifamily residences. There was an equity perspective that I think the whole board really shared. So I don't know if you want to add on that.
Yeah, those are the 2 top line takeaways for me. I mean, this was a 3+ year process, but at the end of the day, I think the result should clearly be seen as one that's created a program that is efficient and equitable. I mean, and really at the end of the day, when it comes to the use of a public resource, that's exactly what you want. We don't have people who need to pay for the service, who don't derive any benefit from it. And we're making it available to people based on circumstances and conditions, and not whether you live in one type of home or another. And so, as Matt mentioned, we have this principle that if you are developed under a paradigm that requires that you accommodate some level of parking for your occupants on your site, well, that should be treated the same, whether you are a single family home or a multifamily building. And in fact, in many ways, it's getting back to the roots of this program, because when it began, it didn't make that distinction between housing types. And somehow over the years, that had crept in. And I'm really glad that we were able to confront that. And then fundamentally, it's just really an important thing for people to consider. Matt mentioned 10% of our county residents are governed by a residential parking permit program, and that we didn't have any alignment with the cost to run the program and the fees that were charged, therefore creating the condition that the general public was essentially subsidizing this program that they could never, ever, or would not ever enjoy, was just untenable. So fixing those things makes for a better program that hopefully we won't have to review for a while.
It was a long time in coming. All right. Well, the board also did approve some large contracts for infrastructure projects, including a new operations and maintenance facility for Arlington ART bus system, a water main project, and a long-awaited second elevator for the Pentagon City Metro Station. So let's start with the ART contract. Matt, Christian, we'll give some of the details of that. We'll just go through all of them.
Sure. I'll say a little. I know this is actually an area where, Christian, you've taken a keen interest in the operations and the facility. But some who are watching may not know that we currently park and maintain some of our buses down 395. And I've got in my orientation, I got the glory of going down there, and it became so clear so quickly that it was not good policy to, in the midst of rush hour, have our buses be, or whenever, be sort of wasted miles down to this facility. So this is bringing that together. We're going to have a facility that we approved the initial stages in the contract, but we'll have some design discussions to come. But we're going to do this at our Shirlington facility. And so we're deciding to make this investment, and it's exciting to see that you can kind of see the horizon when this will get done, and it will be a big step forward for our bus system and our county, with some potential for green benefits, both in terms of the lack of miles, but also in terms of how we're designing this facility. So it's a good step forward. I know you've worked on it quite a bit, Christian.
Yeah, so, garaging our fleet has been the subject of lots of different county board wrap-up conversations over the years as our art fleet has expanded and it's outgrown really the spaces that we've had available for it. So this facility, along with what exists in Crystal City, will be able to accommodate our projected, midterm needs for growth in the art fleet. And, being able to bring all of the maintenance operations in Arlington and reducing all of those deadhead costs that Matt mentioned is going to make for a much more efficient, bus system, which is going to benefit all taxpayers, certainly going to benefit bus riders by allowing for repairs and maintenance to be performed much more quickly, meaning that you should have better on-time performance. I mean, this is just good overall. And when we look at the, situation of where the facility is located, we were fortunate to be able to consolidate several parcels close to where, we've had art buses garaged in the past. And, we can now work with the community on building a facility that is environmentally sustainable, that's aesthetically pleasing. It meets the needs of the art fleet now and well into the future. This really is one of the elusive opportunities for multiple wins from public policy decisions. And I think another thing we should mention, the costs for this facility are not going to be borne by Arlington alone. There are significant grants and other cost sharing that's going to be borne by state transit agencies in this work as well. So I'm excited about it.
Now, one question I had is the office planned for this site was going to be net zero ready. Can you explain a little bit about what that phrase means?
Well, as we think about sustainability, we've had our community energy plan, which looks at very aggressive targets for county facilities and Arlington County in general to be carbon neutral within our lifetimes, or, hopefully I get to live that long. If we're going to achieve that, you actually have to make sure every time you invest in a public facility, you are moving the dial towards that goal. Now, at this point in time, designing a net zero building requires a lot of commitments, which we don't know if we'll necessarily be able to afford with the project budget. But what we can do is to go through the design process and not make any decisions that don't allow us to make this an efficient net zero building, and then hopefully give us time to figure out how we prioritize other resources to bring to the project so that when it is time to construct, we can actually have whatever county board is making the decisions at the time to make that decision to go all the way to net zero. So that's why we're kind of doing that and hoping to ask other people who build things for the future, even if you don't necessarily see that it's efficient or cost effective for you to do it now, design it so that you can be ready, so that hopefully you'll make the right decision when it comes time to construct.
Along those same lines, the board approved a $3 million contract for a project that will add a 24-inch water main over in the area between Lorcom Lane and 25th Street. Why is this project important?
Well, I think we've seen just over the past 10 days, we all assume that that water and sewer are going to be fine, but the entire state of Texas has had such challenge. And this is the project that we're doing is infrastructure. You hear from community members who say, are concerned about, we had a water main break for a short time near Chain Bridge over a year ago. And we have to make sure that we're doing the maintenance and investment in infrastructure so that we have a backup to our current water line, which is getting towards over 70 years old. And so this is the sort of ongoing good governance that we have to do, even while a lot of us are focused and a lot of our attention is focused on COVID. We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, and this is part of that work. So we awarded a contract to provide a backup line to make sure that 70-plus-year-old water line has support, and so our services can continue if there's any challenges in the future. So I think it's good investment in the sort of infrastructure that I think we need to be about as a community, as a Commonwealth, and really as a country at the moment. So it's a good project.
And then finally, the board approved about $6.5 million contract to build what will be very welcome news to folks who live and work around the Pentagon City neighborhood for a second elevator at that Pentagon City metro station. Why was that such a priority? What was the need there?
I'll just briefly say, if you look at the pictures, that there's a need for accessibility, and that second elevator is going to provide accessibility, and this is also the sort of transportation infrastructure is so critical, and so that's why this is a good project. But I know you've also worked on this, Christian. There's economic development benefits to this as well. So
absolutely, we've been working on this for a while. It's been a priority, and it's been a complicated maze to navigate through, not only our processes but working with the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority on making sure that this could get prioritized. And, look, anyone who's visited the Pentagon City Metro Station understands the key deficiency there. We've only got one elevator that exists on the Costco side. We don't have one that exists on the Fashion Center side. So people need to cross Hayes Street, which I don't know, what's that, 6 lanes of traffic plus a bike lane in order to do that. So this is very much about mobility for people who are ambulatory impaired, people who are with strollers, packages, whatever. It also, with the amount of development that we have going on all throughout the area, this is going to be an important relief valve. We also know that sometimes equipment fails. So when one elevator is out and you only have one elevator available, then you have lots of inconvenience and disruption. So this will provide some redundancy. And I'm really thrilled that part of what this allocation will do is also to improve the existing elevator, give it a little bit of an aesthetic upgrade so it better matches the surrounding environment. So I love the access, and I love the ability that this can really serve what is an extremely important and significant transit corridor throughout the region.
One that's going to continue to grow into the future as well. All right. Well, so February was another action-packed month for the Arlington County Board, from ramping up COVID-19 vaccinations to unveiling the 2022 budget to reworking the residential parking permit program and these infrastructure projects. Matt and Christian, thank you both for joining us here today and helping us break down some of these very important issues. And we hope that you will join us once again next month when we once again take a look at the key issues facing the board and our community. I'm Kara O'Donnell, and we'll see you next time.